episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia, and I will be your host. And our guest today is Dave Fairburn. Hello, Dave. How are you?
Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Why don't you take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Dave Fairburn. I've been heavily involved in CMMC for the last year and a half to 2 years. More infamously known for the guy who kind of, I don't want to say created FedRAMP, but was the main author and architect for that, and all that came into. So I've been kind of doing a juxtaposition as far as how can we make FedRAMP and CMMC work together. And so we've kind of come up with some ideas, and we'll see how that works out with the CMMC AB and DOD.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're a very, very, very impressive person. So I want to say thank you for everything that you've already done. And I'm sure you'll be a big help with the CMMC world.
I'm hoping.
All right, today we're going to talk about everybody's new favorite topic, CMMC 2.0 and what it means for the DIB. So our first question is going to be, how should the DIB proceed now that CMMC has changed?
And I've been asked this question by existing clients, previous clients, potential clients, and it all comes down to you do it the exact same way. Look at how CMMC is changing. The only part that's not changing is that there are CMMC security control requirements. So to wait until, some official, pronouncement is made would be crazy for the DIB, because now you're all backed up, because there's all of those other tens of thousands of companies are all going to be fighting for that same limited number of assessors and C3PAOs. So you don't want to wait to the last minute. And quite frankly, the way that it's gone, it's made life a little bit easier for the DIB. It's definitely made it easier for the DOD. Now it's just a matter of, are they going to be able to articulate that modification to a more streamlined process on the DOD side. But for the DIB, they took some of those controls away, some of the procedural controls away. That just makes less documentation. The security control implementation is not going to change that much. So you still want to be heavily engaged early and often, and engage a MSP if you need to. In a lot of cases, you won't. If you have, if you're a small company and you only have, say, 10 people, it's not that difficult to implement these security controls as long as you have a plan to get those implemented. But you're not going to want to come up and go, okay, well, I'm going to do it all this month, because that's not going to work. And but if you say, over the next several months, this is my plan, life goes a little easier for you. And it's going to make things a lot smoother on the DOD side, because now you're not going to have to go the whole spits and starts that it has been, which is this is what I think equals compliance. DOD is going to come back, or C3PAO C3PAO is going to come back and say, well, no, it's not. And these are your deficiencies. So now you have to fix them. Well, that just adds more time to the back end, because even if you get it fixed, and you're ready to roll with your overall assessment to a level that is going to be considered acceptable, now you're still behind all those tens of thousands of other companies. So to take this as an opportunity to get better, and it's going to make a big, big difference to your individual company. It's going to be a major differentiator when it comes to responding to RFPs. It's going to become a major differentiator when it comes to partnering with larger companies who have, they've already implemented their CMMC or NIST 171 security controls, but they've also had a plethora of employees on staff to do that. Smaller companies don't have that. So take your time, do it right the first time. It's not particularly expensive. It just takes a little planning.
And it's only going to get more expensive if they wait, because then when you're trying to crunch things together versus trying to lay out a plan now. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just thinking about that.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I know cost is a huge factor for a lot of the smaller DIB companies. Hell, it's a big factor for a lot of the larger ones too. But at the end of the day, it's a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm.
Now I will say that with the modification and the swap to CMMC 2.0, I see that cost going down fairly significantly. I won't give a percentage, but it's going to go down significantly from what it was because of the whole POAM rule.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about that in a little while.
Mm-hmm. All right. Our next question is, does the change make it easier for the DIB to prove compliance?
To cut to the chase, the answer is yes. It makes it easier. It doesn't make it more streamlined. It doesn't make it the process itself any less painful, but the evidentiary pieces become easier to satisfy compliance requirements. In a lot of cases, because a lot of those 20 extra procedural controls and processes that were all part of CMMC 1.0, those go away. So you have processes and procedures that you had to have developed and implemented at some point anyhow. Mm-hmm. So it makes that much easier for you, because now you have processes and procedures that address how you as a entity function, how your mission is accomplished, how you do business day to day, and how you provide that security along the way. Mm-hmm. Where prior you had to not only accomplish that, but then you also had to satisfy the CMMC language, which even as somebody who's been doing this, for 25 plus years, that's no small task. And when you take that part away, what you end up adding is a better, at least this is in my opinion, but you have a better response from the DoD, from the C3PAOs and the individual assessors who are actually performing the assessments on these environments, because now they don't have to try to interpret CMMC language says X, this document says X-ish, is that sufficient? You take that part of the equation completely away, and now it's, do you have it? Yes, I do. Is it sufficient? Yes, it is. Does it address all my security controls for that particular control family? Yes, it does. And then we can move on from there. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have, you don't have to be a lawyer to figure it out now, which is, I guess, if you had to cut it down to a single phrase, that would be it.
So this speaks volumes, because I agree the language is it's intimidating, it's overwhelming. And for somebody like you to be saying that the language is an issue, that's really, you can't put it any more clear than that. Because
good, because one of the things that, by being involved, from the beginning or close to the beginning, the one thing that we found is that with the assessors, even the original 72, that were handpicked, all of us, we were probably split 50-50 on what it really meant. Well, if you have that kind of, that disparity of understanding with that level of expertise, then that tells you that, okay, well, there's one common denominator, it's the language. So let's make that a little, more direct. And I think they've done a good job on that.
Well, I think that's a really big thing, because, if you take one assessor that goes in and is looking at the exact same information that another assessor came in, you could have one fail and one pass. And
right.
That's not right.
No, and that's, but a lot of that also comes back to, I'll just tell you this in my estimation, okay? With cyber pros, everybody who was an assessor or an RP or who was aligned with us, the one thing that we do because of the way we train everybody is, I know that if I go and I do an assessment on your system, or I send, Tony, Rick, Amira, anybody else, to go help you, they're going to do it the exact same way. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get 100% the same responses and the same answers, but you're going to be really, really close, as opposed to finding folks who are, really seasoned, I call them keyboard bangers, people that have written the documentation, they've implemented these controls, they've gone through the entire SDLC for what it looks like, and they've implemented that at an enterprise level. Well, they're going to have a very high technical level. A lot of the assessors nowadays, and this is by no means a disparaging remark on them, but they came up through the compliance arena. So they have a compliance mentality, what it looks like. So if the control says do this, do you do that? And if they say, yes, I do that, and this is how I do it, and you understand it, then great. But other folks who have been doing this for a long time may look at that and go, well, yeah, you're doing that, but the controls or the tools that you're using don't actually perform those functions. Mm-hmm. So, your documentation is either wrong or you were incorrect in your original assessment. So, there's that balance of, I call it's a balance of art and science. You have to be able to observe and realize deficiencies. Mm-hmm. And then you have to be able to calculate in your head, is this a significant deficiency, or is this like, it said it had to be red and I have, burgundy, mm-hmm. That's mm-hmm. enough. So that's where the expertise levels fall. And I think that's going to change over time. I hope it changes over time.
Yeah, I think I think they're probably going to run into problems where we have this, well, this person thought this and this person thought this, and then there's going to have to be clarity along the road spelled right. out as the challenges are coming right. up with different people.
And that's where the C3PAOs come in. I'm hoping that they don't take that authority away from C3PAOs, which, again, in my estimation, it seems like the DoD was kind of leaning that way. I'm hoping that it does not turn out to be that way. But, if you make the C3PAOs, if you have the authority to recommend to the CMMC AB that a company be certified at whatever CMMC level you are, then you should have that responsibility to make sure that everything that you're reporting on is accurate and can be defended. And the only way to do that is to make them responsible and accountable for their staff and the findings that they have or don't have, as the case may be. And I do see that as, if the DoD doesn't allow us as C3PAOs to maintain that responsibility and force us to accept that level of accountability, then I see the end result being just a backlog of remediation attempts by the DIB with the AB to, CyberPro said this, I don't agree, it's got to be this. And, we can't have all of that back and forth, it's got, otherwise the AB is going to be, 50 people and they're just going to be pulling out their hair. We don't want that.
The new Department of Defense's cybersecurity program, CMMC, can be very confusing and overwhelming. A3 is a cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification. A3 builds CMMC packages and has access to a marketplace of consultants, RPOs, and assessor C3PAOs. A3 creates a roadmap for each cybersecurity requirement and helps break things down step by step. Please visit cyberdataintelligence.com/A3. And then do you think that the DoD, when they said that maybe they were going to go in and do the assessments versus the C3PAOs doing that, is that realistic? I mean, as far as manpower and
no.
Yeah,
I'm going to tell you something, it's probably not going to sit well with some of the DoD folks. Okay. But the level of expertise on the government side is not necessarily the same level of expertise on the commercial side. Those of us who have been federal contractors for many, 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 many years, we know that delta in capability exists. And in a lot of cases, not to kind of, go on too much of a tangent here, but it comes down to, the money you're paying them. Federal workers can only make X amount of dollars, and so eventually they're going to work to whatever that level is. Not every time. In some cases, you'll find assessors who will say, you know what, I'm getting paid whatever, and I'm just going to give it my best no matter what. That's not always the case. It's not always the case in the contracting world either. But in the contracting world, if you don't pull your weight, you're not around. In the Fed side, not so much.
Right.
So, and then the DoD would have to become essentially the Department of CMMC. They would have to stand up a ridiculously high number of PMOs that are going to have to filter up to a centralized PMO, to handle just the complete onslaught, the thousands and thousands and thousands of assessments. They're going to come. Again, they're going to come in spits and starts, but they're coming. And if you don't have the staff on the ground ready to go, then it's just going to cause problems. And half of your back room is going to spin their wheels trying to address questions or clarifications from the DOB or the DoD to the DIB. And you don't want that either, because now you've got nothing happens when you do that. Put the onus on the C3PAOs. Let us drive that, and because our success is measurable, by the number of successful assessments and certifications that we deliver. Take the money part off the table completely, okay? Because that money's getting spent, whether you spend it with DoD or you spend it with a commercial entity, doesn't matter. The dollar amounts probably do, but yeah, it's probably all I'm going to have to say about that one. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole.
Okay. All right. So we'll go to the next question.
Okay.
So how does the allowance of POAMs affect the compliance process for the DIB and the DoD?
When CMMC started, I was a huge fan of the no POAMs. And the reason I was such a huge fan was because, again, in the federal world, I was used to POAM tracking being and other duties as assigned kind of role for a lot of people, and the variability with which those POAMs are assessed, both in time, personnel, funding, hitting milestones, all the things that it's supposed to be. Well, it doesn't really exist well on the federal side in a lot of cases, not across the board, but in a lot of cases. And nobody can debate that. I mean, that's a fact. And the DIB's going to find that as well. Once they start doing it, that they're going to have the same problems. So hats off to the DoD and the federal workforce in general, because they've been kind of the leaders in this, but they don't do it particularly well either. All you have to do is look back at how many systems are accredited through FSMA, and whether you're using the NIST CFF or RMF or anything, HIPAA even, if that's what you wanted to do. Those POAMs are supposed to address certain milestones that happen if you're going to be an accredited system and if you're going to maintain that accreditation ongoing throughout that life cycle. That is not the case if you take the POAMs away. Okay, so what I thought was a good idea was take the POAMs away, make them get it right perfect first time. Well, we're asking them to do perfect, and the DoD and the rest of the federal government, they're not perfect. We can anybody who's done this for any length of time in the federal market can tell you horror stories about things that have happened. Now, take the effect of POAMs out of the equation for a second. Now you look at the ability to have POAMs. As a small business person, if I have to put myself in their shoes, I'm not so concerned about not passing an assessment the first time. I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to, but I'm not intimidated, because if I end up with, out of 110 controls and I have 20 of them that are going to be POAM for whatever reason, I've accounted for them. I've established very firm milestones and resource requirements, and I know how it's going to be done. But the beauty of it is now either the C3PAO, which is where I would recommend it lie, the C3PAO has that responsibility to track those POAMs in real time. So that if you have something that has to be resolved by, January 1st, if it's not resolved by January 1st as a C3PAO, I'm on the hook for that. DOD. If you put DOD on it, they're going to come on the hook for it, but you may not actually get any traction on that because they've got so many that they're dealing with. And I promise things are going to fall through the cracks. You can't help but do it. But at a smaller level, the C3PAOs can handle that. Well, what is easier, though, is that when an assessor goes in, we'll do it a different way. When an RP goes in and just says, you know what, I'm consulting you, you can POAM these items. We know that the funding's going to be available within the next 90 days. So let's set up a 90-day POAM and we'll have this whole thing resolved, whatever this thing is. Much more manageable. It's a little more personal because you've got real money attached to the implementation. And because the federal dollars doesn't necessarily mean real money. I mean, we talk trillions of dollars all the time, and nobody really understands what that means. But $1,000 to a small company can be a big difference maker. So how do you implement that control? How do you leverage those responsibilities and those accountabilities, for that particular implementation to be correct, effective, long term? And to me, that happens when you take a business approach to them, as opposed to a compliance approach to them. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, it definitely does. So are you saying that, so if a small business, let's say they make the POAM and there's some things that are maybe financially, they know they're going to be responsible for, they don't maybe have the money unless they definitely get the contract. So then they can put that out there, and then knowing that they have the money that's going to come from the contract, and then they'll be able to put it in place because they have an established date, but it's just after they get money from the contract.
As much as I'd love to say absolutely, theoretically, that is true. However, the fact of the matter is not all security controls have the same value. So if you had to do a quantitative analysis on that, access controls are a lot more valuable from a risk to calculate risk posture than say, the maintenance controls, or using third-party maintenance. All of them have value, but that value is varies widely based on what that control is meant to have. Your encryption, significantly higher than your personnel security control implementations. Now, one of the problems that I see is that the lack of understanding on the DIB side of, and I see this all the time with clients. I know it has to be FIPS 140-2 compliant encryption. How do I do that across the board? So as a consultant, I can go in and tell them, but as a C3PAO, obviously I can't. But as a consultant, I can tell them how to do it, how I've seen it done successfully, both on the Fed side and on the commercial side. So, but if somebody were to say, well, how do I do my personnel security? Well, you would think it would be pretty much common sense, but there is a business aspect to a lot of the personnel security requirements. And so you have to leverage that. And since no two businesses are the same, they're never all going to be exactly the same. So you have to have that, that foresight, to kind of go into there and say, okay, well, this is where, you need to be. This is how we're going to get you there. And if we have to POAM this, let's POAM it. Now, one of the problems that you brought, well, you may have inadvertently brought this up, but when you get an RFP, and if you're certified, meaning the AB and DOD all agree that the number of POAMs you have are acceptable. The level of POAM you have is acceptable. In other words, you're not POAMing all of your high findings, for example. If these are all acceptable, now you can be awarded that contract. But if they come back and go, well, look, if you did this on a POAM and a promise, and you've got a system that's set up and you've got 110 POAMs, you're not getting the contract. One would hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. Well, this was really, really good. I really appreciate all of your input here with all of this stuff. Is there anything else you want to throw out there? There we go.
Don't be afraid of CMMC. There's going to be more changes to come. And I see these changes as making life a little easier for the DIB and the DOD. Once we get, what's the word I'm looking for? Once I get the leadership of CMMC AB able to communicate well with the leadership of DOD, and we don't get conflicting messages, which has been the case, and I don't know where that's coming from. Once that gets resolved, I think things will move smoother.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, that's as politically correct as I can possibly say that.
Exactly.
I was definitely walking a line.
Well, thank you very, very much for all of your time and expertise with this whole thing. I think this was very, very helpful to everybody understand 2.0 a little bit more. And so thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dan. It's been great.
Anytime, anytime. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.